Welcome to the Maintainable Software Podcast, where we explore the art of improving existing software with seasoned practitioners who have helped organizations overcome the problems often associated with technical debt and legacy code. I'm your host, Robby Russell. On this episode, Carlos Blé, who is the CEO of LeanMind, a software engineer and the author of the book Sustainable Code in Spanish. Carlos joins us today from the Canary Islands. Carlos Blé, we're so glad to have you join us on Maintainable. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad that we can make this happen. So as you reflect on your experience in the industry, what do you believe are a few characteristics of, dare I say, well-maintained software?
For me, there are 4 simple rules that are based on the Kent-Spec rules on simple design. And they are that the code must have tests, and those tests must be sustainable, maintainable. It doesn't matter if you write tests, but then nobody can maintain them. The abstractions in the code must be appropriate. I really like the sentence by Sandy Metz. She states that it's better to have duplication than the wrong abstraction. And I really like that. And the last one is that the code should express the intent of the programmers. So it should be doing exactly what the programmers intended the code to do.
One of the things you mentioned there was the importance of having tests, but also making sure that they can be maintainable. What do you believe kind of contributes to tests becoming unmaintainable?
Many things. Naming is one of them. So exactly like the production code, if the names don't tell you anything, then you have a hard time understanding the code. The same applies to the name of the tests. But also the simplicity, the feedback loop, if you are stating the cases in a way that communicate the intent. So pretty much the same things that apply to production code maybe apply to tests. And you know how difficult it is to run and to configure the environment. When they break, how fast do you find the issue, what it is? So it's a combination of, say, qualities.
Something else that, on the topic of testing, is there a strategy that you take with the people that you're working with, whether, we'll dive into a little bit more about what your company does and types of services, but as far as when you're working in an existing environment existing software code base, and say the test to your perspective isn't terribly well maintained so far, but you're trying to improve on that, how do you kind of strategize going in there and figuring out where to start? I often talk with people about, well, let's talk about the most mission critical parts of the software or things like that, and they advocate for writing tests there. And I'm always a little suspicious that that's actually probably one of the most difficult areas to probably write tests if there's not a lot of existing testing. So how do you kind of navigate that and try to get in there to get some early proof of concepts on implementing testing into an existing environment where it's not necessarily been a priority for the team?
We try to be very pragmatic. So if there's a part of the code that is running well, there are no defects in there and there are no need for changes in the code, we don't care if the code is horrible there. We don't go there. We don't change what is functioning. So we try to identify what are the pains and what brings more value to the client. So what are the parts of the code delivering more value, more critical? And then from there, we may plan for different testing strategies. So one could be end-to-end testing. So consuming the whole system as a black box and sending inputs and getting outputs using tools like Cypress or any other end-to-end. But sometimes you want to have direct feedback, and you need to reduce the layers being exercised by the test to have a clear understanding of what's going on. And for those cases, we may plan for mock objects or fake objects. So it really depends on the kind of the project and where the value is. And to measure the quality of the test, I would say mutation testing is great. So mutation testing is that you basically go and introduce a few defects in the production code on purpose. So just to see how the tests break you will be surprised that very often the tests don't break, so they are testing nothing or they are not catching the defects. And you can do that manually, or there are even some tools that will help you turn some symbols into code to introduce defects. And that's very good to value or to measure not only if the tests catch defects, but also what are the kind of feedback that they are providing, and how easy it is to spot where the issue is.
Do you find that it's easy to do that on projects that you've been primarily developing on yourself, or is it easier to come in with a fresh set of eyes and try to break, your test suite? Because if you know the happy path as a software developer, well, I know this all works, and maybe there hasn't been a lot of testing there so far, but it's an interesting idea of going in there and intentionally trying to break them. But I also wonder how often developers can do that to their own stuff without, how they're going to avoid that. Or
I would say it's easier than it looks, because most of the projects that we have been working on for the last 15 years, the test coverage is not very high. Still today, it's not very high. And many of them are integration tests. Even if the coverage is high, they don't consider many cases. So breaking the code is not very difficult. But on top of that, doing some exploratory testing and thinking of what are the edges of the system and how to break it, that's a very important, I'll say, an essential skill that you should have also. But I wish I went to the projects and exploratory testing and breaking things was the most critical part. But often it is not. The critical part is that there are no enough unit tests to make the code maintainable, to be able to change the code without fear.
I can appreciate that. One of the things you had also mentioned there was related to like test coverage. What do you see as like a clear distinction between, say, test coverage and code coverage? And are there metrics that help you determine whether or not there's enough code coverage? Like, do you have kind of like a rule of thumb that you and your team or the companies that you're working with kind of focus on?
Finding a number, it's always dangerous and can play against you. But I'd say something above 50% coverage, that's something you may want to have. Beyond 80% or 90%, it might not pay the cost of maintenance. It might not be feasible, or you might not return the investment. But I'd say something between 50 and 80 could make sense.
Do you use the metaphor technical debt very often in your profession?
Yeah, we actually have a markdown file that we version in Git, usually called tepdebt.md, where the development team manage the technical debt. So some issues may make it into the Kanban or the board, where the product manager and the other people, the stakeholders, are watching or are participating. But we also like to have our own management or care about the technical debt, because there are certain things you don't want to negotiate or you don't need to have a meeting for. Say, like, you need 2 hours to clean up some breaking test, or you need some more time to finish off one refactoring you were doing. And for that, we don't want to forget. So we want to be accountable and make sure that the job is done. But we don't necessarily want to bring those small tasks into the main board.
Is that because it's difficult to get that prioritized, or it just increases the cost of addressing it, or a little bit of everything?
It is to reduce the burden of management in the project. I'd say the same way you don't ask for conditional or recursive or a for loop, you don't bring that into the common board. There are also testing or refactoring tasks that will last for some minutes or a few hours, and you don't want the people working around you to be more concerned about something you are going to do in just today or tomorrow or this week. Right.
It's interesting. A number of people that I speak to that are part of like large product teams, where they're maybe they feel like they might bring up things that they consider technical debt with the product team, and then it doesn't tend to get prioritized, or maybe they didn't approach the product team in a way that help them understand the value and the benefit to the product versus how it's going to make their life as a software engineer better, like trying to weigh up those different things. Like, we need to do this because it's slowing us down as software developers. And then on the product side, they're like, we never asked you to cut corners, so there's always this interesting thing of like, who's responsible for taking care of that stuff. In the same way as like a manager, like if you need to clean up your spreadsheets or change the formatting, you don't need to necessarily ask other people in a different department to like, can you approve that I spend a couple hours taking care of cleaning up my workspace?
Yeah, I think that might have to do with the fact that some people call technical debt what is actually a horrible mess. And when the team has already lost control of the project and they are really being impeded by the code, and then they desperate and need some time to really handle or tackle these big issues. And for that, of course, you need to have a conversation with the board, with the stakeholders or the product manager. And this is something you need to address because that's something, it is already stopping you from delivering value. But I would say that's more, or that's beyond technical debt.
In conversations that you've had with other teams, do you feel like, you mentioned that there's a horrible mess? How do you currently think about what technical debt actually is in your day-to-day work versus maybe like the other example being like just things have kind of gotten into a big mess?
So technical debt for us is when we are planning for the changes ahead. When we say, okay, this solution is not good enough for the future. Within 1 year, we will have to change this. But for now, there are other priorities, so we can go for a cheaper implementation, a faster implementation that is going to be well-tested and well-designed. But let's say we know it's not scalable, or there might be some quality attributes missing in there. But the priority for the business is not to spend so much time in there. So we are going to plan for a temporary solution that we know we are on purpose. We are deliberately creating or planning for. In the near future, we will work on that.
You mentioned you have a Markdown file in your Git repository. Can you give me an example off the top of your head of like what that might look like? Hey, we know this weird area of the code base or this particular area might need to be refactored. Do you ever have conditionals like, if we ever get to a point where we've got X number of users in the system, this probably will not scale beyond that? How do you kind of provide that context so you can remind yourself, how do you always also know whether or not you're going to need to address that versus you have like a gut feeling that you might need to address it in the future if there's a scaling issue? Because sometimes the scaling issue never manifests, right?
Yeah, I think I'm realizing now that I should provide some more context. And so the way we develop software is most of the time we are working in pairs, so pair programming or mob programming. For sure, for the critical design decision and architecture, we are more than two people looking at the code or at the diagram and drawing and bouncing ideas to each other and brainstorming. So we are together. And so very often when we write down technical debt into the document, two people at least, and so they add a little bit of context, but it's not too much. It's not like being alone, being a solo developer for a long time where nobody else has a context that you have, and then you have to explain a lot of things in the tech debt. So usually we write down the file, the issue, the rationale. So like you said, what is it affecting, or why it's not enough for the future, or even why we discarded other solutions. In many cases, we also like to add comments to the code to reflect the conclusion. So, hey, we implemented this piece of code in this way, even though you might think that the other solution might be more natural or intuitive, but we had to discard the other solution for this reason. Because there's no way you can tell that in the code. So I'm a big fan of comments in the code to explain decisions, not to explain what the code is doing. So we try to add comments to explain all those things.
We'll be back with our interview with Carlos in just a moment. Hi, it's me, Robby. I just wanted to take a quick moment to say thank you for making time to listen to the Maintainable Software Podcast. If you're finding these conversations valuable, please consider sharing a link amongst your peers on social media, like on Twitter or Mastodon. By the way, we're on Mastodon now. You can find us there. I think we're there. How are you? How are things going in your world? Everything well? You can also write a review on Apple Podcasts. I wouldn't mind that. We also have a newsletter now that you can subscribe to. You can find the link at the top of maintainable.fm. Also, do you know someone that I should interview on the podcast sometime? Shoot me an email to Robby with a Y at maintainable.fm and state your case. And now, let's get back to our interview with Carlos Blé. Let's take this as a good opportunity. You mentioned you're pairing quite a bit. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the types of projects that Lean Mind specializes in.
So most of the time, we accompany teams, developers, to level up in terms of skills whilst delivering value for the business. So they hire us typically to add more quality to the code, at the same time delivering features. And the way we do it is pairing or moving with the developers from our client so that we bring our expertise with the testing and design, but they bring their knowledge about the domain and the issues they have every day in the business. And together we craft the code to reach the deadline writing maintainable code. So maintainable code is actually the core of our company, how to help other development teams write code that is maintainable without stopping the production for months or years, how to make it in a way that is practical. So many years ago, I used to give or run training courses for them. And what happened after the training course is that they tend to do what they have been doing for years. They forget about the training. So now we are providing a little bit of training, and then we work together in the code base for months. And then there might be some specific training days in the middle. But it's about growing together. And that's why we do pair programming and more programming that often.
I like that approach, knowing that, you can workshop things with people, go put them through trainings, but then there's the implementation of that, and then you go back to what's been working for you in the past. And so hopefully they're able to retain that. And I think that's great that you're then also kind of sticking around for a period of time to help them continue leveling up and actually implement these things. If my own company does something kind of similar, but I think we've usually been hired to come in and help build out software, and we're like, what you actually probably need is a bit more training, and then for us to get out of your way, and so it's an interesting kind of. I think I'm kind of trying to figure out how to go on the other side of let's get into training, because I feel like we need some of that to formalize that, rather than just coming in and be like, we're not just a couple of extra developers that your team needs for a period of time. I feel like there's a process problem that's hard to navigate when you just get thrown into the middle of an existing process versus trying to think about how the team defines what done is, or how they're going to, better measure things going forward, or what their pull request process is. There needs to be some conversations, and I don't feel like it can just happen organically just because I'm going to hop on a pairing session with someone. You need to help the team understand that. One of the things that I'm curious about as well, so it sounds like possibly Lean Mind usually comes in and works on existing software projects versus, do you ever work on greenfield projects very often?
Sometimes we do. We have now a client in Palo Alto. We are the delivery team for them. And in the project, we are also doing pair programming and more programming, because it's what is most effective way of developing software for us to addressing the issues before finding simple solutions up front, or just this quick feedback loop that you have when you are pairing. Basically, you end up delivering solutions faster, with better quality and more simple. But in most of the time, we are embedded in other teams. And so when we arrive, it's a good time to evaluate their onboarding process, because we have to do the onboarding, try to install all the software, sign up in all the tools, try to understand the ceremonies, what is the definition of done for them. And we are invited to be critical thinkers in there. We like to provide feedback in a way that is friendly and supportive. And together we change. So every time we arrive to one development team or company, we grow. And the goal is that they also grow, mixing the cultures and the techniques. And finally, we deliver value to the business, which is pay the money in the end.
You mentioned that, you're being hired to come in and share your thoughts and opinions about, like, I don't think I've ever had a client say, please don't come in and not share your feedback and input. Like, they want to know what's like working and what's not working. But I've also been very conscientious about when you go into an existing team, how do you be a good guest in that environment? Or like, how do you start that off? Because I've been in scenarios where I've seen people come in and they're very assertive and be like, you're doing it all wrong. And that's causes interesting friction. How do you kind of think about that yourself personally, and how do you recruit people and think about how with your own people and part of your organization, help them think about what does it mean to be a good consultant going in and being a good guest for that early on, onboarding period and starting to provide feedback? And do you have some patterns that you try to approach with that?
We have a profound respect for our clients because all of them are product development teams, digital products, and they are making money. So I really, as an entrepreneur, the only business that I have been able to make work is a consultancy, but not the product development. I have failed several times. So I really respect the people who are making money with their own product. So if they are there and they have a horrible code or difficult time with their culture or whatever, but they are making money and the people are reasonably, let's say, happy in the environment, it's all respect that we feel for them. And we want them to reach the next level. But we really value the code. Even if the code is very hard to work with, we really value that the code is the tool that brought them where they are profitable or thriving somehow. And so for the first month, we are there taking notes, trying to understand why do the things the way they do, and being very polite and trying to learn from everyone. It doesn't matter if it is a junior developer. We try to learn from everyone because we need to understand, to comprehend what's a problem they are fixing and what are the solutions they are addressing. And I would say before 1 month, you cannot tell them what to do at all. Absolutely. You just shut up and take notes and think and ask questions and try to be nice to the people. And after some weeks, you might be able to understand or to suggest certain improvements. Actually, the best way to suggest is that you share the idea with the people in a way that they are owners of the idea. They are co-creators of the idea of how to improve the system. And that's beautiful when they bring the idea that you both have been developing together. So it's not you as an outsider suggesting what to do, is you co-creating with them what do we need.
It's interesting. I'm similar in the realm, working in the consulting business for industry for a couple decades now. I don't necessarily strive in like a product environment in the same way, and I have my own reasons for that. But the going into those environments and trying to okay, they have a business that's making money. The software is helping contribute to that. The people that are working there may or may not be responsible for the state of the code base that it's in today. But the code base is the way it is because of all the things that went into making it the way it is, and you can't unwind that, go back, set the clock back and redo it all over. When you're going into an environment in those first several weeks or month, you were saying, be polite, shut up, just take notes and form alliances, with other people. One of the things that I've seen happen with some consulting companies, they'll come in, it's interesting, like a little bit of politicking, working with your peers, because I'm actually kind of curious, is LeanMind usually brought in because of a recommendation from one of the software engineers, or is it a manager saying we need help and they bring someone in? And those are two very different situations to come into an environment and be like, I'm here to help, but there might be people on the team being like, why are you here? We can take care of this ourselves. So how do you navigate that, like all those different kind of competing interests?
Yeah, usually it is a CTO or someone with a decision-making role, the one who call us. So in a way, we have the management consensus or permission to operate. Doesn't mean that the developers have to like us, and we find resistance everywhere, especially when you want to be polite and you want to be nice and understand people. But if you need to write tests, which is something we highly recommend, and some people don't like it, even though you have been explaining and demonstrating and writing code with them. For some people, they are not gonna like that. They have to. They are being part of a change. Some people don't want any change at all. And so there are always times where when resistance kick and coaching and non-violent communication. I'd say that soft skills are perhaps even more important than the technical skills.
That's why I'm always trying to think around, like, what does it mean to be a good guest? How to show up, be helpful, not throw people under the bus, you mentioned like nonviolent communications. Just, it's a tricky thing to navigate. I'm curious as, when you're looking to recruit people to add to your own organization that you, I'm assuming, then place in these different client engagements, what sort of attributes are you looking for in those people that would make sense for that type of world? And do you find that there's certain types of developers like that's just not going to be a good fit for them? How do you kind of navigate that yourself?
In the interview process, we have to like each other. This is dangerous because there is always bias, that how you like people or don't like people. So this is dangerous. For that reason, we try to have different people interviewing or running the various interviews. So it could be me, but in other cases, it could be a female colleague, or we try to see how people react. And I can remember we try also to see how people act in the face of bias from their side as well. There were a couple of times where the interview was a guy and it was a female colleague of us running the interview, and the guy didn't let her talk or didn't. The behavior was different than when I arrived, because I at that interview, there was an interview where I arrived in late. So my colleague was with the guy for 20 minutes or so, and he radically changed the attitude when I came in. I don't know if that's because I'm the boss or what's the reason, but he wasn't nice at all before I arrived. And then in the end of the interview, when we challenged him with some cases or some scenarios, he didn't. He wasn't polite at all. He was kind of aggressive, grumpy. There was no match. So doesn't matter if he's a great coder. That's not what we need. We need the people to be nice, and then they should have very good technical skills as well.
Yeah, it's like the lone wolf programmer works, I think, and can be a really successful software developer, and they can do a lot of really good things. But if they don't know how to be part of a pack, or maybe that's a bad example there. But in terms of like, it's a challenge to kind of bring people in and think about what's this person going to be like if we put them in front of a unknown future client, right? And versus can they do the work, but can they also then communicate that well with other people and help up-level people on the client side of things? And so I'm curious about that because it's always something I'm kind of rethinking as we're recruiting ourselves from time to time. So I also wanted to make sure we talk a little bit about your book, Sustainable Code, for those that are unfamiliar with it, and I'll include links to it in the show notes. But if you wouldn't mind, maybe you can provide like a high-level intro to what the book covers and what type of level software engineers do you think this is best suited for?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So the book is right now only in Spanish. Some people are, asking for the translation, but I think in English there are already terrific books on software design. I really think this book wouldn't bring anything new at all. A little bit of my perspective, but this book is a combination of others like Implementation Patterns on Clean Code, the books by Sandy Metz, many other books that I like and that I have read and studied over the last 20 years. So this is like a combination. At the beginning, I wanted to call it maintainable code, but then I went to the dictionary and the word maintainable doesn't really exist in Spanish. It is understandable. I believe the root of the word is Latin, but the word itself sounds a little bit ugly in Spanish and is not really in the dictionary. So the dictionary asks you or recommends to use the word sostenible, which is sustainable, because it means that it can be, it can endure or it may last over time. So I find it best term in Spanish. And then I'm using sustainable code in English for that reason. So the notion of clean code is a metaphor that doesn't resonate with all the people. If I'm writing code and I need to be to create a software that is functional, why do I have to care whether the code is clean or not? What's the value of clean code? And that happens because it's a metaphor. But in the case of maintainable code, it is not a metaphor. You want the code to be able to change and to be understandable over time, because that's the way we provide continuous value to the business. And that's why I prefer the subject or the title maintainable or sustainable code.
It's interesting, the thought around clean code as a way to describe code, and it kind of assumes it feels subjective based off of, everybody might have a different idea of what clean is, in the same way, like what is done, what does clean code look like? Is clean code something you want to manipulate and change, or is that just going to immediately start to make it dirtier as soon as you start adding some complexity to what is perceived as clean code? So I like that, thinking about, obviously I have a podcast called Maintainable. I think about this, but part of that was always to me thinking we build a lot of products, software code, and I'm a big proponent of avoiding the rewrite because I think those often are horrible. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on, do you find yourself more often on team rewrite or team refactor more often? Let's actually go down that path. What do you see as a distinction there when you should consider a rewrite versus just refactoring it?
I would say I'm team refactor. And I can tell you one story about the big project I was working on some years ago. This is the biggest automotive company in the Canary Islands. At the time, it was 2015, I believe, or 1 year before, when they called me. And at that time, their revenue was near 700 million euro. So it's not a small business. So they found one of my books on TDD and one of my talks at the local university, and they wanted to consult with me for the new rewrite or the new project they were planning. So they had a code base that they were developing for 12 years or so, and it was 8 million lines of code. Most of it was in the form of stored procedures in the SQL Server database. So it was really, really complex. When they called me first, I didn't, for some reason, I didn't believe that they were able or willing to invest in new methodology and technology. But I said, they are in the neighbor island, very close to where I live. So I said to them, if you pay me the flight and the taxi and you buy me lunch, I'm happy to go and visit your office and have a discussion. I was thinking they were going to say no or whatever, but they invited me and we have a lovely day and a meeting with the CEO and CTO and a lot of people involved. And they said to me, we want to rewrite the whole thing and it's going to happen in 1 year from scratch. And I couldn't believe what they were telling me. I think I had to go to the toilet and wash my face with fresh water because I was huge project, and they were counting on me. They were saying, will you help us do this? And I was totally overwhelmed with the complexity of the project and what they were asking. So I said to them, let me go home. I need to reflect on this. but definitely how to write is not what I would recommend. This is not the way to go. Let me think of it. And so some weeks later, I had a plan to recruit some of my friends, contractors, that they have a lot of experience in the field. And we sent a proposal for developers, for contractors. And we spent 2 years working with them and modernizing the code base. And it went very, very well. But we never rewrite or regrow the whole thing. What we did is to use a strangled fig pattern, which means that you localize or you find out part of the application that you can seal and that you can put into a box, define some interface, try to replace chunk by chunk. So split the big thing into small boxes, see how you can interconnect those boxes, and then slowly, progressively go replacing one by one. And learning along the way, because the complexity of the business rules in the automotive industry is huge. That's crazy. And so there are tons of things that you had to learn and to understand. And we went very, very slowly. And still today, they have a lot of old code from the old days. So after 7 or 8 years, most of the code that they are running and that is bringing value to the business is new. But I'd say there are tons of stock procedures running in the database and bringing a lot of value as well.
That's good. I think and when you push back on the 1 year rewrite, did you just think that was there anything around that you didn't believe that could be done, or was just the wrong decision to make? And what they should do is further deepen their investment into the current approach, but optimizing it. How do you help them navigate that sort of decision without them thinking, is this, like sunken cost problems? Sometimes I think people are like, we just need to scrap this because we just keep throwing more money at the problem. But kind of that's what software is, right?
I exposed simple math. I'd say you have been developing this software for 10 plus years with more than 20 people. How do you think it's possible to do it, to rewrite it in 1 year? And even if we were able to do so, why do you think we are going to write it in a way that is more sustainable or maintainable for the future? Because these people don't know how to write tests, for example. So even if we were able to write all the features, which is pretty much impossible, the code would be messy in 1 year. But on the other hand, you need to keep adding features during that year because the business cannot be frozen for 1 year. You have to fix defects and add more features. And they, just having a conversation, an honest conversation about the context, they realized it wasn't impossible. I think for some reason they were expecting me to bring them some kind of magic, miraculous plan,
It's very optimistic. I've had a number of those conversations over the years myself as well. And it's like, well, you could potentially rewrite this, but I don't think that's going to make anything better, in a year or two. If you don't change how your team's thinking about the process, you mentioned if they're not even writing tests, maybe it'll feel easier to start working on writing tests on a brand new thing where you don't have to worry about it fitting testing into an existing cobbled together mess of things. But at some point, if you're working against that sort of timeline, I would imagine you start skipping things that might be in your best interest, like writing tests, because you're like, well, this seems like an additional thing, not just part of my day-to-day workflow as far as deciding if this is working, if this is the right approach, and what does done mean when you can finish a feature? Was it tested? How did you test it? Can someone else run those tests? Is it going to stick around? And that's a lot of things to navigate because you're trying to rewrite while learning a bunch of new processes in parallel. And with the times, so you want quality, you want it fast, and you want it done well. Those are like, I think everybody talks about the pyramid triangle or what have you, and like you can pick two of those. So it feels like it's immediately thinking they're going to go faster, but they're going to probably end up in a very similar situation with maybe a new technical stack that somebody wanted to play with, but it's not necessarily going to, always turn out the way you hoped it would.
Yeah, totally. In the end, what I always say to the C-level management is that the value of your company is not your software, it's not your code, it's your team. So if you have a very efficient or effective team working on a code base and you say for some reason the code base goes to another team, then in just 6 months, the effective team could take the code base to a different place, which will be way better than the old one. So the happy ending of this story of the automotive company is that they embraced XP, and they were a very big fan of the unit testing and automatic testing, working in pairs. So they have been running meetups and conferences and promoting XP in the Canary Islands. So they are a very popular company here. And the big value for them is the team. Now everybody wants to develop with test and proper design, simple code, all the things that we were together working for several years. And that's a value they have more than the code.
Hi there. We hope you're enjoying this week's episode of Maintainable. While you've been listening, has anyone crossed your mind who might be looking for help with their Ruby on Rails application? Planet Argon, the producer of Maintainable Podcast, would love to meet them. In fact, we've got a pretty sweet referral bonus program set up. If you send someone our way and they sign up for Planet Argon services, we'll give them a $1,000 discount. And your reward? We'll send you $1,000 just for connecting us to the right person. Sounds like a win-win for everyone. Head on over to planetargon.com/referrals for more info. That's planetargon.com/referrals. All right, let's get back to this week's episode.
And a couple of quick last questions I wanted to dig into with you. So one was thinking about for those listening who might be curious about, they maybe there's some concerns about their code base or maybe their team's workflow, and they maybe pitched the idea of doing more pair programming, but it's maybe not been well received, or they would want to spend more time working on tests, but they don't really feel like they have the time. What sort of advice could you offer them on how to start improving that situation for themselves today?
I'd say you shouldn't try to force those practices. Try to present them as something fun. Try to find the spaces where there is no stress, there is no tight deadline coming, and it could be a brown bag session or some kind of team building activity where you present the practices as a game, as something to learn, but never as a dogma, never as something that has to be done that way. Because in the end, if you can write good unit tests or integration or any kind of tests, and if you do it afterwards, I'm mixing here the idea of TDD as well, but if you can feedback and talk about your code and your ideas without pair programming, but in a way that is that works for you and is not a bottleneck, reviewing the code and making decisions, that's fine as well. Some people engage in conversation at the beginning of the day, then they split, then at the end of the day, they share what they have done or something like that. And this, if that's okay for them, you don't have to, force pair programming. That's what I would say. Curiously,
how much of the time that you're programming are you pair programming with somebody? Like, is there a percentage of your time? Do you do a lot of solo work as well in there? Is there kind of like a rough, kind of approximate range that you're aiming for?
Well, today it's more my colleagues and me, so I'm spending more time managing the company, although I try to code every week on real stuff, and I support other people. But I'd say my colleagues are spending something between 4 and 7 hours a day coding with somebody else.
Do you have any go-to, is your team primarily remote and distributed?
Yeah, totally. We are based in the Canary Islands, but the clients are in London or Asia, Germany, Madrid, Barcelona, many other places. Actually, right now, there are no clients in here at home.
Okay. Are there any go-to tools that you tend to use for helping optimize that pair programming experience?
Yeah, we like the share the IDE and some kind of live share coding where multiple people may access the code and type not at the same time, but switching between the driver and the navigator could be smooth, so that taking turns is something doable and easy to do, which is something you want. You don't want the driver to spend more than, say, 1 hour, 1 hour or 2 hours, and you want people to take turns and to, you don't want people to fall asleep.
No, that's true. Yep, about 4 to 7 hours a day. Great, and thanks for sharing a little bit of detail. And I know that you've worked on a couple of books and such now. How did how do you find time to work on those types of projects in parallel to running a company? Just again, maybe some free advice for me as the owner of a consulting company, where I'm like, well, I'm speaking with potential clients or existing clients, occasionally pairing with people, in kind of probably more of a mentorship type of way more than anything. But I'm curious, how do you find time for that and prioritize that?
I book time for writing in the mornings. So before writing the book, I have like an idea. So I have a Notion document or some other kind of document where I'm writing down ideas. After weeks or months, I come up with a table of contents, say, of the book, kind of TDD way. So I write the table of contents with the chapters and the sections that I imagine the book may have. And then I say, okay, this is time to book for writing hours in the morning, which is where I am more creative, I'd say. And it's just 1 hour, or sometimes, if I'm lucky, 2 hours in the morning that I book for writing. Over 1 year or 1 year and a half, I consider that to be part of my job. Perhaps because in Spanish there are very few books on programming, and the demand is quite high in Latin America and Spain. So the book is, this one, Sustainable Code, is very well received and valued, and having a lot of purchases and good comments. So in one way, I feel that I'm contributing to the Spanish-speaking community. And in another way, it's a very good marketing material for my company. So it's several goals in one shot.
Right. Well, I appreciate for sharing that, and congratulations on finishing books. I once started a book and was not able to finish it in the early, and it kind of the timeline. I was working as kind of more of an independent consultant, and got a book deal, worked on a lot, and then a lot of projects came in, and then I hired people, and it became very difficult for me to focus on writing when I was like, how do I now deal with employees and early era of a fresh new company with I've got 10 employees. How do I have a couple hours a day to work on writing a book about a brand new piece of technology that keeps changing every 6 months? So congratulations. Maybe one day I'll get there. Well, great. I'll definitely include links to your books and to your website and stuff, and for your company website and the show notes for everybody. Is there how else can people kind of follow up and learn more about you and your organization online?
I'd say our website, leanmind.es, my website, carlosblé.com. And from there, you can find the social networks, newsletters, Telegram channels. You can find everything there. We're trying to publish more and more material in English. There are not as much as I would like to have in our website or in my blog posts, but you can find some stuff over there.
Oh, there wasn't one other quick question I'd like to ask everybody. Is there a non-software book that you find yourself recommending to people to read?
Sure. I really like the Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. I'd say that's one of the books that changed my life and the way I see communication with people. So it's totally recommended.
Great. I'll definitely include links to that in the show notes for everybody. Well, it's been such a delight having you join us on Maintainable, Carlos. Thank you so much for stopping by to talk shop.
It's been a pleasure and an honor. I must say, Robby, that I really appreciate and love your humility as an interviewer. You make things very easy for me as an interviewee and make me feel comfortable. And the way you ask questions is always trying to make the conversation interesting, and that's very appreciated. I really like the podcast.
Thanks so much. I appreciate the feedback, and thanks again for hopping on Maintainable with us and for giving our listeners something to think about. Hope you have a good rest of your day, Carlos.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Maintainable.